I didn't know my life was about to change forever the moment I sat down at that table with an empty plate in front of me. For 8 years, I had been a wife, a loyal one, a patient one. The kind of woman who believed that love meant endurance, compromise, and quiet sacrifice. The kind who told herself that marriages had phases, that distance was normal, that cruelty could be misunderstood as stress, ambition, or humor taken too far. I was wrong. My name is Marissa, and the night my husband invited me to his birthday dinner, only to plan my humiliation as entertainment for his friends, was the night everything finally came into focus. At the time, I was still trying to save our marriage, still believing that if I showed up enough, if I stayed calm enough, if I proved I was supportive and understanding and not difficult, he would eventually look at me the way he used to, the way he did when we first met, when his smile felt genuine, when his touch didn't feel transactional. So when Ethan, my husband of 8 years, told me he wanted me at his birthday dinner, I said yes without hesitation. It wouldn't be the same without you, he said, resting a hand on my arm. That small, familiar gesture nearly broke me. I clung to it like proof that something was still alive between us. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that 2 weeks earlier, while I was still depositing my paycheck into our joint account and paying every bill without fail, Ethan was upstairs in our bedroom, laughing on the phone with his sister. Laughing about me. He actually thinks he's invited for real, Ethan said, his voice light, amused. Like food and everything. They laughed harder after that. They joked about how funny it would be to let me sit there with nothing. No meal, no acknowledgement. Just watching me squirm while everyone else ate. I heard every word. And standing alone in my own hallway, listening to my husband plan my public humiliation like a joke, something inside me didn't shatter. It settled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't confused. I wasn't questioning my instincts. I wasn't wondering if I was too sensitive or imagining things. I saw him clearly. And once you truly see someone, once the fog lifts, you can never unsee the truth. So I did something Ethan never expected. I stopped begging for love, and I started preparing to leave. That dinner wasn't going to break me. It was going to be the last thing I ever paid for. Before I became the woman sitting silently at a table with an empty plate, I was someone else entirely. 8 years earlier, I was 27, grounded, practical, and deeply optimistic about love. I worked as a business systems analyst at a mid-sized tech company, steady hours, decent pay, nothing glamorous, but enough to build a stable life. I earned around $80,000 a year and lived within my means. I believed security mattered more than appearances. That belief would later be used against me. I met Ethan in the summer of 2017 at a mutual friend's cookout. He stood out immediately, not because he was the loudest or most charming in the room, but because he paid attention. Real attention. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened without interrupting. He laughed easily, warmly. When he smiled at me, I felt seen. He worked in brand partnerships and marketing strategy, a world completely different from mine. His life felt fast, creative, social. He talked about trends, image, connections. I talked about structure, logic, and long-term planning. At the time, it felt complementary, balanced. He made me feel exciting. Our relationship moved quickly, too quickly in hindsight. 9 months after we met, he proposed. Ethan bought the ring, white gold, elegant, tasteful, and slid it onto my finger with tears in his eyes. I remember thinking, this is what certainty feels like. We married the following August. Most of the guests were his friends and family. My parents flew in from Washington State, where they had retired, but beyond them, my side of the room felt thin. I noticed it. I felt it. But I told myself love didn't need symmetry. That should have been the first warning. In the early years of marriage, the changes were subtle enough to dismiss. Ethan started commenting on my appearance. Not cruelly, not at first. Suggestions, framed as help. That dress isn't really you. Try something sleeker. Those shoes don't fit the vibe of this crowd. You're amazing, babe, but my clients are visual people. I adjusted. I told myself compromise was part of partnership. Then the joke started. You're kind of boring compared to my friends, you know that? You're adorable, but you don't really get ambition the way we do. He always smiled afterward, always laughed. And if I looked hurt, he'd say, I'm kidding, you're too sensitive. By our 3rd year of marriage, those comments had sharpened. They came out in public. at dinners, at parties, in front of people whose approval he craved. He mocked my car, a fully paid-off Honda Civic I'd owned for over a decade, said it embarrassed him, suggested I lease something more appropriate for our social circle, a BMW, a Mercedes. When I showed him our finances, real numbers, real limits, he accused me of being cheap, of not caring about how we looked, of holding him back. That was when money became a constant tension. We had joint accounts. It felt normal, responsible, but I began noticing discrepancies. Thousands disappearing faster than they should. My entire paycheck went in every 2 weeks. Bills were covered, yet the balance kept dropping. Ethan always had explanations. Work clothes, client dinners, expenses I'll get reimbursed for. I trusted him. I didn't demand receipts. I didn't audit my marriage. I didn't know he had multiple credit cards in his own name, cards I'd never seen, cards maxed out without my knowledge. What I did know was that I paid everything. The mortgage in Cedar Hills, groceries, utilities, internet, cable. His leased white Mercedes SUV, entirely in my name because his credit wasn't strong enough. His salary, around $70,000 a year, vanished into designer clothes, spa visits, expensive dinners, and a carefully curated Instagram life. And somewhere along the way, our marriage stopped feeling like a partnership. We barely spoke unless money was involved. Our bedroom went quiet. Months passed, then nearly a year. He was always tired, always stressed, always unavailable. Yet online he was vibrant, out late, laughing, alive. Just not with me. I felt like a shadow in my own home, useful, silent, invisible. Still, I stayed, because I believed love meant endurance, because I didn't yet understand the difference between patience and erasure. By the 4th year of our marriage, the house no longer felt like a place of rest. It felt like a stage, one where I was expected to play a role quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. The tension didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, through tone shifts, half glances, and the way Ethan's patience for me seemed thinner than it was for everyone else in his life. He started coming home later, not dramatically late, just late enough that dinner would be cold, late enough that conversations felt rushed or postponed. "Long day," he'd say, dropping his keys on the counter without looking at me. I stopped asking questions because the answers never led anywhere. Meetings, networking, drinks with people who might be useful later. Useful. That word began to echo in my mind more often than I liked. His friends were always impressive on paper. Influencers, consultants, people who talked in metrics and brand value and social reach. When we were around them, Ethan changed. His voice grew sharper, louder. He laughed more easily. He teased me in ways that made them laugh too. Once, at a rooftop party, someone asked what I did for fun. Before I could answer, Ethan cut in. "She's more of a homebody. Spreadsheets and documentaries. Not exactly party material." They laughed. I smiled. Inside, something curled inward. His sister Qley became more present during that time. She visited often, slept over, commented freely on everything from my cooking to my wardrobe to how I spoke. "You're sweet," she once said, smiling thinly, "but you're not really his world, you know?" I asked Ethan later why she felt comfortable saying things like that. "She's just honest," he replied. "You should try not to take everything so personally." I started questioning myself constantly. Was I boring? Was I holding him back? Was I failing as a wife because I didn't want the same life he wanted? The financial strain worsened. Charges appeared on our account that didn't align with any explanation. I began tracking balances quietly, comparing deposits to withdrawals late at night while Ethan slept beside me, his phone face down on the nightstand. Sometimes he'd catch me looking. "Do you not trust me?" he asked once, his voice cold. The question wasn't curious, it was a warning. So I stopped checking, I stopped asking. That was when intimacy fully disappeared. Any attempt at closeness was met with irritation. A sigh, a rolled shoulder pulling away from my touch. "I'm just not in the mood," he'd say. "Can we not do this?" Yet the photos online told a different story. Clubs, bars, champagne glasses, bright smiles. I began to feel like an accessory, useful at home, embarrassing in public. Still, I told myself this was a phase, that marriages survived worse. Then, 3 weeks before Ethan's 34th birthday, something shifted. He mentioned a dinner, an upscale place downtown, Bellamy's. "I want you there," he said gently. "It matters to me." He touched my arm the way he used to, warm, familiar. For the first time in months, I felt hope. I didn't know that was the moment the truth had already been spoken. I just hadn't heard it yet. 2 weeks before Ethan's birthday dinner, I came home early from work. My company offered flexible hours, and that afternoon my head was pounding from staring at screens. I decided to leave around 3, thinking maybe, just maybe, we could share a quiet moment together before his evening plans. Something normal, something married. The house was unusually quiet when I stepped inside. No music, no television, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the echo of my own footsteps in the hallway. Then I heard his voice. It drifted down from upstairs, light and animated, carrying a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. He was laughing, really laughing. I started toward the stairs, smiling instinctively, ready to call his name until I heard my own. "He actually thinks he's invited for real," Ethan said, his voice bright with amusement. "Like, food and everything." I stopped mid-step. There was a pause, then a woman's laugh crackled through the phone speaker. I recognized it instantly. "Qley." "You're kidding," she said. "You're actually bringing her?" Ethan laughed harder. "She believes it. I made it sound like a real invitation. You should have seen her face." My hand tightened around the stair railing. Qley's voice dropped conspiratorially. "Are you seriously going to let her sit there with nothing?" "Oh my God, no," Ethan replied. "That's the best part. I think it'll be hilarious if she just sits there while we all eat. Let her figure it out." Qley hesitated, barely. "That's kind of cruel." But she was laughing too. "That's the point," Ethan said. "I want to see how long she'll take it before she says something. Or leaves. Either way, it'll be entertaining." The word hit me like a physical blow. Entertaining. I stood frozen in my own hallway, my chest tight, my ears ringing, listening to the man I'd married plan my humiliation like a game. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Sudden. Brutal. Clean. All the moments I doubted myself, every joke, every dismissal, every unexplained expense, every night alone while he lived a life that didn't include me, collapsed into a single, undeniable truth. There was no love here. No respect. Not even basic kindness. Just contempt. Carefully wrapped in charm and ambition and image. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked quietly back to the front door, stepped outside, and sat in my car with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly until my heartbeat steadied. That was the moment I stopped trying to save my marriage. Not because I was emotional, but because I was finally awake. And once I understood exactly who Ethan was, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being his joke. I didn't confront Ethan that day. That surprised me too. When I finally drove away from the house, my hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts weren't racing the way I'd always imagined they would in a moment like this. There was no screaming voice in my head demanding answers, no urge to rush back inside and demand an explanation. Instead, there was a strange, heavy calm. It felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm that had been building for years, one sudden crack of thunder, and then stillness. The kind of stillness where everything becomes painfully clear. I parked a few blocks away and sat there for a long time, watching people walk past my car. Couples, parents with strollers, a woman laughing into her phone. Ordinary life, unfolding as if nothing monumental had just happened. How long have I been living like this? I asked myself. I replayed the conversation in my head, not with disbelief, but with a kind of forensic attention. The tone of his voice, the ease of his laughter, the way cruelty had come so naturally to him. This wasn't a slip, it wasn't stress, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was who he was when he thought I wasn't listening. By the time I went back home, evening had fallen. Ethan was already gone, out with friends, most likely. I moved through the house quietly, noticing details I'd ignored for years. The expensive art on the walls he'd chosen because it photographed well. The guest room filled with boxes of his unused clothes. The kitchen table where I'd paid bills month after month, convincing myself that love would eventually balance the ledger. I sat down at that table and finally let myself feel it. Not rage. Grief. Grief for the woman I'd been when I married him, for the trust I'd given so freely, for the years I'd spent shrinking myself so someone else could feel larger. What did I miss, I wondered? When did this start? And then, for the first time, I asked a harder question. What if I didn't miss it at all? What if I had seen every sign and chosen hope over reality? That night, Ethan came home late, tipsy, loud, smelling like expensive cologne and wine. "Hey," he said casually, tossing his jacket over a chair. You're home early. I looked at him from across the room, really looked. The man I'd defended. The man I'd paid for. The man who had laughed at the idea of my humiliation. I heard you earlier, I said quietly. He froze just for a second. Heard what? Your phone call with Qley. The silence stretched. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing in irritation rather than guilt. You were eavesdropping? He asked. Not apology, accusation. That told me everything. I was in my own house, I replied evenly, listening to my husband plan to humiliate me for fun. He scoffed. You're being dramatic. It was a joke. A joke where I sit there starving while you laugh. You take everything so personally, he snapped. God, no wonder you don't fit in with my friends. There it was. Not denial, not remorse. Contempt, spoken plainly now. I nodded slowly. I see. And for the first time, I didn't try to explain myself. I didn't argue. I didn't beg him to understand. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and slept alone. Not because he wasn't there, but because I already was. The days that followed were strangely methodical. I didn't cry in the shower or stare blankly at walls the way movies tell you heartbreak is supposed to look. I moved with intention, with precision, as if some switch inside me had finally flipped from hope to self-preservation. Ethan noticed the change almost immediately. I stopped asking where he was going, stopped reminding him about bills, stopped adjusting my tone to avoid conflict. At first, he seemed relieved, then irritated. You've been quiet lately, he said one morning, scrolling through his phone while I poured coffee. What's that about? Nothing, I replied, and for once it was true. There was nothing left to explain. That was when his family stepped in. Qley started calling more often, dropping by unannounced, making comments that felt less like concern and more like surveillance. You should really try harder, she said one afternoon, standing in my kitchen like she owned it. Ethan's under a lot of pressure. Men like him need support. I looked at her calmly. So do women. She laughed, sharp and dismissive. You're being sensitive again. That word. Always that word. Ethan's friends followed her lead. Invitations I used to receive together now came addressed only to him. When I did attend, the air felt heavy with judgment. Conversations stopped when I approached. Smiles felt forced. One night, after a dinner where I was ignored for nearly an hour, Ethan leaned over and whispered, You're embarrassing me. Can you at least try to be pleasant? I stared at him, stunned. I haven't said anything. Exactly, he said. It's awkward. That was when I realized something chilling. My silence threatened him more than my pain ever had. Behind the scenes, I started preparing. Quietly. Carefully. I made calls during lunch breaks, sitting alone in my car, consulted professionals, opened a new account at a different bank, began moving money, only what was legally mine, into a separate place. I gathered documents late at night while Ethan slept, tax returns, bank statements, mortgage records, years of proof laid out in neat folders. And then there was the evidence I'd been avoiding. Months earlier, I'd noticed something strange on Ethan's work laptop when he left it open on the counter. Emails, expense reports, numbers that didn't align. Now I looked closely. Personal dinners billed as client meetings, shopping trips listed as business travel, spa visits marked as team development. It wasn't carelessness. It was fraud. I documented everything. Screenshots, dates, amounts. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt done. By the time Ethan's birthday dinner approached, the tension at home was suffocating. He accused me of pulling away, of being cold, of sabotaging the marriage with my attitude. I let him believe that, because while he was preparing a joke at my expense, I was preparing an ending, one that would leave no room for confusion, and no path back. The night before the dinner, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious about what Ethan planned to do, but because I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything I had lost. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. Slow, easy, unbothered. The sound of someone who believed the world would always bend to accommodate him. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who laughed freely, the one who believed marriage was a shelter, not a battlefield, the one who thought love grew stronger the more you gave. Somewhere along the way, I had learned how to disappear quietly. I had learned how to minimize my needs so they wouldn't inconvenience anyone else, how to smile through disrespect, how to tell myself that being chosen once meant I had to earn that choice every day afterward. That realization hurt more than anything Ethan had ever said to me, because it meant I had participated in my own erasure. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and went downstairs. The house felt hollow, like a hotel room after checkout. I walked through each room slowly. The living room where we'd hosted parties for people who never cared about me. The kitchen where I'd balanced budgets that only I respected. The guest room where Qley slept whenever she wanted, treating my home like an extension of hers. I sat on the couch and finally cried. Not loud, not dramatically, quiet tears that soaked into the fabric while my shoulders shook. I cried for the years I wouldn't get back, for the trust I'd given to someone who found pleasure in my pain, for the version of myself who thought endurance was love. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if leaving would make me the villain he claimed I was. If people would believe his version of events. If I would stand alone while he played the wounded husband convincingly enough to win sympathy. The fear was real. Being alone is terrifying when you've been taught that your worth comes from being chosen. But then I remembered his laughter on that phone call. Remembered the word entertaining. And something inside me hardened, not into anger, but resolve. I wasn't doing this to punish him. I was doing it to save myself. By dawn, my tears had dried. My eyes burned, but my thoughts were clear. I showered, dressed for work, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older than it had a year ago, more tired. But there was something new in my eyes. Recognition. That evening, Ethan kissed my cheek casually before leaving with Qley. "Don't be late tomorrow," he said. "It's a big night." I smiled softly. "I won't be." He had no idea how true that was. Because by the time I sat down at that table the next night, I would already be gone. This was the lowest point of my life. And the last moment I would ever feel small. The restaurant was exactly as Ethan had described. Dim lighting, hushed voices, the kind of place where the silence felt expensive. I arrived on time, 7:30 p.m. They were already seated. Ethan sat near the center of the round table, relaxed, confident, holding a glass of wine like he belonged there. Qley was beside him, dressed sharply, her posture territorial. The rest of the table was filled with his friends, people who had watched me fade into the background for years without ever asking why. No one greeted me. No smile, no acknowledgement. I took the seat at the far end, the one clearly chosen for convenience, not inclusion. The chair felt colder than the others, or maybe that was just me noticing everything now that I wasn't trying to belong. Menus were passed around. Orders flowed easily. Steaks I'd never buy for myself, bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly utilities, appetizers chosen without a glance at prices. When the waiter reached me, Ethan lifted his hand without looking in my direction. "She's fine," he said casually. "Just water." The waiter hesitated, glancing at me. I nodded once. That was the moment. Not humiliation. Confirmation. For 2 hours, I sat there with an empty plate while they ate and laughed. The jokes came easily to them now, thinly veiled insults disguised as humor. Qley suggested I should have eaten before coming. Someone joked about budget guests. Another analyzed my silence like a character flaw. I smiled politely, checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. Right on schedule. I caught the waiter's attention and spoke clearly. "Could I get the check, please?" The table went still. Ethan turned toward me, confusion flashing across his face. "What are you doing?" "I'd like the full itemized bill," I said, my voice calm, "for the entire table." Qley's eyes narrowed. "Marissa, don't make this weird." The waiter returned with the leather folder and placed it in front of me. $7,147.30. I took out my card, one I had kept separate for emergencies, and placed it on top of the bill. "I'm paying," I said, standing slowly. "The full amount, including a generous tip." Ethan's face flushed. "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I met his eyes steadily. "No, I'm done being embarrassed." I pulled out my phone. "I think everyone here deserves context." I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the air, clear, unmistakable, laughing about me, planning my humiliation. Qley's voice chiming in, the word entertaining echoing through the room. The silence afterward was absolute. Ethan went pale. Qley stared at the table. No one spoke. "I'll pay for tonight," I continued evenly. "Consider it closure, but this is the last thing I will ever fund in your life." I nodded to the waiter. "Please run the card and add an extra 1,000 to the tip." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the moment I stepped into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. I checked into a hotel that night instead of going home. Not because I was afraid of Ethan, but because I didn't want my first night of freedom to be polluted by his voice, his anger, or his attempts to rewrite what had just happened. I wanted silence, control, space to let reality catch up. My phone vibrated nonstop. Missed calls, texts, voicemails that shifted rapidly from fury to panic. What the hell was that? You humiliated me. Answer your phone right now. Marissa, this isn't funny. I turned it off. The next morning, at exactly 9:00 a.m., my attorney Robert Park filed the divorce papers. Ethan was served at Qley's apartment later that day. According to the process server, the moment he saw the documents, he started yelling, loud, uncontrolled, unraveling. Qley tried to intervene. It turned physical. The server left quickly. Within hours, Ethan took to social media. Long posts, emotional captions, carefully framed accusations. He claimed I had financially abused him, that I had cut him off without warning, that I had left him stranded, heartbroken, unable to afford basic necessities. He launched a fundraising page titled "Help Ethan Start Over," painting himself as a devoted husband discarded without mercy. And people believed him. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments calling me cruel, heartless, a gold digger, a manipulator. I didn't respond. Robert had warned me, silence protects you. Truth doesn't need defending, it needs time. Then Ethan made a mistake, a desperate one. He texted me late one night in all caps. "We need to talk about the baby." My stomach dropped. But logic returned quickly. We hadn't been intimate in over 4 months. I had proof, messages he'd sent complaining about our dead bedroom, jokes he'd made to friends about it. When my attorney requested medical confirmation and court-ordered verification, the claim vanished within 48 hours. Never mentioned again. Then the real consequences began. The documentation I'd submitted to Ethan's employer triggered a formal investigation. Expense reports, receipts, timelines. The result was undeniable. Over $43,000 in fraudulent charges over 3 years. Personal dinners billed as client meetings. Shopping trips disguised as business travel. Spa visits reported as professional development. The district attorney filed charges within a week. Ethan was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Fingerprinting, mugshot, booking. The story hit local news outlets almost immediately, helped along by viral clips from the restaurant that had already been circulating online. Public opinion flipped overnight. The fundraiser was shut down. Donations refunded. His accounts went private, then disappeared. Friends distanced themselves. Some reached out quietly to apologize. Others vanished entirely. At mediation, Ethan demanded half of everything. Spousal support, sympathy. The evidence destroyed his position. Bank records showing I paid every bill. His hidden debt, over $60,000, entirely in his name. Proof of contempt. Proof of fraud. We settled. A 60-40 split in my favor. No spousal support. His debt remained his. I kept the house. 30 days later, the divorce was final. 3 months after that, Ethan was convicted on all counts: probation, community service, full restitution. His career was over, and I walked away quietly, without revenge, without celebration, without looking back, because the truth had already done everything for me. I moved out of the house a week after the divorce was finalized. Not because I had to, but because I wanted a place that belonged to me, without memories echoing off the walls. I chose a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood called Riverside Gardens. Nothing impressive. Clean, calm, mine. For the first time in years, every decision was simple. I bought furniture I actually liked, not pieces chosen for how they photographed. I left walls bare until I was ready. I cooked meals without worrying whether they were on brand. Silence stopped feeling heavy and started feeling safe. I adopted a dog from a local shelter, a scruffy mixed breed with sad eyes and a crooked tail. I named him Cooper. He greets me every day like I'm the best thing that's ever happened to him. No conditions, no expectations, just joy. I started hiking again on weekends, joined a recreational sports league, made friends who didn't care what I earned, what I drove, or how I looked online. People who valued honesty over image. Life slowed down, and in that quiet, I healed. Months later, on a random Sunday afternoon, I met someone at a bookstore. His name was Elliot. He was kind, grounded, unimpressed by status. We talked about books, about life, about the absurdity of pretending to be anything other than yourself. There was no rush, no performance, no fear of saying the wrong thing. And that was the biggest lesson of all. Love doesn't require you to shrink. Respect doesn't need to be earned through endurance. And partnership should never feel like survival. Sometimes late at night, I think about Ethan, not with anger, but distance. I hope he learns something. I hope he changes. But his story is no longer mine to carry. Mine is about a woman who finally listened to herself, who stopped confusing patience with loyalty, who chose truth over comfort, who walked out of a restaurant and into her own life. If you're watching this and recognizing pieces of yourself, please hear this. You don't have to wait for things to get worse to leave. You don't need permission to choose dignity, and you are not difficult for wanting respect. On the other side of endings is something quieter than revenge. It's peace, and it's worth everything.